Hari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradham Hari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradham Hari. Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjanam Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjanam Yamunatiravanacham Hari. Yamunatiravanacham Hari. Jaya Radha-madhava Kunja-bihari. Jaya Radha-madhava Kunja-bihari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradham Hari. Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjanam Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjanam Yamunatiravanacham Hari. Yamunatiravanacham Hari. Jaya Radha-madhava Kunja-bihari. Jaya Radha-madhava Kunja-bihari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradham Hari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradham Hari. Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjanam Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjanam Yamunatiravanacham Hari. Yamunatiravanacham Hari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Shama Sundara Radha Shama Sundara Hare, Jaya Radhe Sham, Radhe Sham, Jaya Radhe Sham. Jaya Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram. Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Nitai Gaura Haribol, Haribol, Nitai Gaura Haribol. Nitai Gaura Haribol, Haribol, Nitai Gaura Haribol. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudeva, Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Jayam Vishwapad Paramahamsa Varagachaya Sota Satta Shismachila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. Jayam Vishwapad Paramahamsa Varagachaya Sota Satta Shismachila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada ki. Anantakuri Vaishnavarinda ki. Sirup Si Sanatan Bhattaraganath Jiv Gopala Bhattara Saraganath Sadgosam Prabhu ki. प्रेम से कोशि कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवधरि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गो गोपा गोपिका विनाचा मुकुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की मैपुर धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की तुलसी महारानी भक्ति देवी की गंगा मुनि देवी की हरिनाम संकीर्तन यज्ञ की श्री श्री गौनिताय की श्री श्री कृष्ण बलराम की श्री श्री राधा श्याम सुंदर की गो प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल समवेत भक्त वृंद की all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we are reading from the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Thirteenth chapter, Nature, the Enjoyer and Consciousness. Text number 8 till 12. Amānitvam adambhitvam ahiṁsā kṣāntir ārjavam ācāryopāsanaṁ śaucaṁ sthairyam ātma-vinigrahaḥ indriyārtheṣu vairāgyam anahaṅkāra evaca janma-mṛtyu-jarā-vyādhi duḥkha-doṣānudarśanam asaktir anabhiṣvaṅgaḥ putra-dāra-gṛhādiṣu nityaṁ sama-cittatvam iṣṭāniṣṭopapattiṣu mayi cānanya-yogena bhaktir-avyabhicharini vivikta-deśa-sevitvam jana-saṁsadi adhyātma-jñāna-nityatvaṁ tattva-jñānārtha-darśanam etajñānam-iti proktam āryāvam yadato-nyata. Word for word explanation. Amānitvam, humility. Adambhitvam, pridelessness. Ahiṁsā, non-violence. kṣāntir, tolerance. ārjavam, simplicity. ācāryopāsanaṁ, approaching a bona fide spiritual master. śaucaṁ, cleanliness. sthairyam, steadfastness. ātma-vinigrahaḥ, self-control. indriyārtheṣu, in the matter of the senses. vairāgyam, renunciation. anahaṅkāra, being without false egoism. Eva, certainly. Cha, also. Janma, of birth. Mṛtyu, death. Jara, old age. Vyādhi, and disease. Duḥkha, of the distress. Doṣa, the fault. Anudarśanam, observing. Asaktir, being without attachment. Anabhiṣvaṅgaḥ, being without association. Putra, for son. Dāra, wife. griha-adishu, home, etc., nityaṁ, constant, cha, also, sama-cittatvam, equilibrium, iṣṭā, the desirable, aniṣṭā, and undesirable, upapattiṣu, having obtained, mayi, unto me, cha, also, cānanya-yogena, by unalloyed devotional service, bhakti, devotion, avyabhicharini, without any break, vivikta, to solitary, desha, places, sevitvam, aspiring, arati, being without attachment, jana-saṁsadi, to people in general, adhyātma, pertaining to the self, jnana, in knowledge, nityatvaṁ, constancy, tattva-jñāna, of knowledge of the truth, artha, for the object, darshanam, philosophy, etat, all this, jnanam, knowledge, iti, thus, proktam, declared, ajñānam, ignorance, yat, that which, ata, from this, anyata, other. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home and the rest, even-mindedness and amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All this I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be, is ignorance. So purport is very long, so we try to read and say a few words as much as possible. Purport. This process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the 24 elements as described before. This is actually the means to get out of the entanglement of those elements. So in the first verses, so there was a description about the different elements of this material world. The 5 gross elements, so that means earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then the false ego, the intelligence, and so on. The 10 senses, the mind, the 5 sense objects. So these are all the elements of this world, and that is actually for the living entity. So the kṣāntir, the field for activity. So Arjuna, he had asked Krishna in the beginning of this chapter, I wish to know about this material world, nature, and then about Purush, the enjoyer, that means the living entity. And of course, those who know about the field of this material world or this material body, and then about knowledge and the object of knowledge. So the object of knowledge ultimately, that is Krishna, the Supreme Lord. So then Krishna is explaining to Arjuna. So the body is the field of activity, and one who is in the body is the knower of this field. So one who understands the difference between the knower of the body, means the soul, and the body, so he's supposed to be a knowledgeable person. So here basically the qualities are described by which one can become free from this material entanglement, by which one can practically realize one's spiritual nature as the eternal servant of Krishna. And so the first which is explained is amānitvam, that is humility. One has to be humble. As Mahaprabhu also told, Trinarapi sunichena tororapi sahishnuna amanina amadanena kirtaniya sadahari. One has to be very humble, because always difficulties are there in this material world. So one has to learn to tolerate the difficulties which are there. For that one has to be humble. And then, so amānitvam, so not expecting any respect from others, but giving respects to others, that is humility. Of course, true humility is there when one is realized, one has practical realization of oneself, then one is truly humble. Which is not immediately achieved, but one has to practice to be humble. One has to practice humility. And then in purified consciousness, when one sees oneself as an infinitesimal spiritual being, as the eternal servant of Krishna, practically, then one is truly humble. So the embodied soul is entrapped by the body, which is a casing made of 24 elements, and the process of knowledge as described here is the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse. So the first line of the 11th verse, mayi cānanya-yogena bhaktir avyavicharini. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotion, unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So when one comes to the platform that of understanding that I have to serve Krishna, mayi cha-ananya, so in undivided devotional service, bhakti. So that is actually the highest knowledge. So therefore Prabhupada is writing, the process of knowledge terminates. So knowledge means one is inquiring about the absolute truth. And so if one understands that one has to serve Krishna constantly, then one has acquired sufficient knowledge. And there's no need ultimately to make more endeavor to know more. If one understands that I simply have to serve Krishna. Of course, at the same time, there are so many ways how one can serve Krishna. And so detailed knowledge may still be there in different branches of knowledge. For example, if one wants to be a pujari, one has to learn how to worship the deities. If one has to be engaged in preaching, then one has to know the philosophy very nicely in order to be able to describe to others this philosophy. So some knowledge is required, but so if one knows that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, I am the eternal servant of Krishna, so that is the most important aspect of knowledge, and that is sufficient then. If one knows I'm the eternal servant of Krishna, and if one knows that, then one knows everything. But then different details may be there which we need to know also. So, if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. So if one is not understanding that one has to serve Krishna, then what is the use of humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance? Ultimately there is no use. Because when one attains the human form of life, so that is there for self-realization. Self-realization means to understand that I am the eternal servant of Krishna, and then one should practically engage in the service of Krishna. But if one takes the devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. On the other hand, if one simply understands that I am the servant of Krishna, but if he is not yet fully humble and steadiness is not yet completely there, one may not be completely renounced, but it doesn't matter, that will come. Because as explained, true humility is only there if one is fully realized. But if one comes to the point that I have to serve Krishna and one is engaged in Krishna's service, then one is properly situated. And then slowly but surely, true humility will be there. And one will be very tolerant. And one will be detached from the objects of sense gratification. As stated in Śrīmad-Bhagavatam, yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarvai gunais tatra samasate suraha. All the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. Famous verse from the Śrīmad-Bhagavatam. So the demigods, they have many good qualities. Of course, sometimes even the demigods are engaged in sense gratification, which should be avoided, just like Lord Indra. Sometimes he's even crossing the moral codes, which are there for a devotee of the Lord. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 8th verse, is essential. ācāryopāsanaṁ. So upasana means worship. So here Prabhupada has explained as approaching a bona fide spiritual master. That is mentioned in Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu by Rupa Goswami, that the 64 limbs of devotional service are there, and the first is Gurupad Ashray, taking the shelter of the spiritual master and then inquiring from him. So, and then, of course, so worshipping him, that is required. Like Guru Puja, every day Guru Puja should be performed, worshipping the spiritual master. And sometimes when the appearance day is there of the spiritual master, then one should be engaged the whole day in glorifying and worshipping the Lord. And day after tomorrow we are going to observe, or every follower of the Vedic culture, they will worship the spiritual master, Guru Purnima, Vyas Purnima. So it is the appearance day of Vyasadeva, who is the literary incarnation of the Supreme Lord, who established the Vedic literatures for the benefit of the conditioned souls. So everyone is worshipping him on this day. So, and as we chant every day, Yasya prasada bhagavad prasadam, Yasya prasadam nagadikotopi, Dam stavam stasya yasyasti sandhyam vande guru sri charanara-vindam. So this praise we are supposed to chant every day. So we have to offer obeisances to the spiritual master, Vandeham Sri Guru, starting with the lotus feet. Pushpanjali, offering flowers to the lotus feet, bowing down to the lotus feet, showing that we are insignificant and we need the help of the spiritual master, and then we inquire from him, and then he will give us knowledge, and then we can advance in spiritual life. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. So if one transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. So when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master, then actually spiritual life is starting. So we say initiation, diksha. Initiation means the beginning of spiritual life, truly speaking, because he's the empowered representative of the Lord, and he's helping us to understand that we are connected to the Supreme Lord. By nature, we are always connected to Krishna. We are never disconnected from Krishna. But due to the influence of the external energy, so the conditioned soul is engaged in material life, and he's not aware of his actual position. But by good fortune, if one meets a devotee, and if one reads transcendental literature, then one comes to know of one's situation, and then one can engage in devotional service. But then one has to take guidance from the spiritual master, who is a realized soul. And under his guidance, one can advance more and more in spiritual life. So up to the highest stage, one always needs the guidance of the spiritual master. Even in the liberate position, even if one is liberated, still he will accept that I'm the servant of my spiritual master. He will never give up the relationship that I'm the servant of my spiritual master. Whereas the Mayavadis, so in the beginning they may accept the spiritual master, but then sometimes when they're so to say realize that Aham Brahmasmi, I'm connected to the Supreme Lord, I will merge in the Supreme Lord, then I don't need Guru anymore. Guru is one with Krishna, and we merge all in Krishna, and everything is one. But that is not the advanced position of spiritual life. There's a misconception there. So, but in a transcendental spiritual life, one understands that I'm the eternal servant of Krishna, but first of all, one will take shelter of the spiritual master. Until even in the liberated state, one will always remember the spiritual master, one will always respect the spiritual master. Like Prabhupada, he always showed respect to his spiritual master. And Bhaktisiddhanta always respected his spiritual master. So that is eternally going on. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. So the actual path starts with accepting his spiritual masters. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that is not this body anything, honor or dishonor pertaining to this body is useless. One should not hanker after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items. So here Prabhupada is recommending, and the Privacharyas have also recommended, that one should analyze how one is progressing. How am I becoming freed from this attachment to this material world? So how much practical knowledge I have, how much taste I have for chanting the holy names, for serving Krishna, what is my eagerness to attain perfection. So we can judge ourselves, and we should from time to time. Next, non-violence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually non-violence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people, so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is non-violence. So non-violence is not only physical, like hurting somebody with the body, by, of course, Prabhupada is mentioning killing, that is the greatest violence, but even harming sometimes by physical power, not killing, but just to, for example, sometimes you can see people, even in Vrindavan, so of course, those who are selling the fruits and vegetables, they want to save their fruits and vegetables. And sometimes if a cow is coming or so, then they're beating the cow very badly. That is a kind of violence. But one should try to do it more gently, if possible. So, but then here, important point, even in terms of speaking. So one should actually speak very gently towards others and not hurt anyone even by speaking. Sometimes words are as sharp as an arrow, hurting somebody else so much by speaking not nicely to somebody. So that has to be avoided. And here also Prabhupada is explaining that one has to give this knowledge, this spiritual knowledge to others. If one is not so, otherwise one is practicing violence, if one is not giving this knowledge to others. Of course, it depends on the individual also. Not everyone is very outgoing person and knowledgeable, but at least we should try to be properly situated, and we should try to help others also. By giving knowledge, or even sometimes we distribute also prasadam to others. That is helping others, and then they may come to spiritual life also. Sarva bhutehi terataha, that is a quality of a devotee that is always concerned for the welfare of others, that they may come to spiritual life. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlad, who only 5 years old, was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlad tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to making advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination. So we have to be tolerant. And difficulties will always be there in this material world. Not only from other living entities, or too much cold, too much heat, or even too much rain sometimes is causing havoc. But then even from our own body and mind, we are inconvenienced sometimes, or we are disturbed. But nevertheless, we have to be engaged in spiritual activities and try to cultivate knowledge and try to remain undisturbed despite so many situations which are causing us difficulty. Or even if one is mentally disturbed, but still one has to be engaged in chanting the holy names, in serving the Lord, in hearing about Krishna, speaking about Krishna. And then the difficulties will go away also. They are actually coming and going. And one has to be tolerant, and one has to be patient, and one has to be very much determined. One has to have strong determination and always remain enthusiastic. Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. As for acceptance of the spiritual master, that is essential.
because without the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. One should approach the spiritual master with all humility and offer him all services so that he will be pleased to bestow his blessings upon the disciple. Because a bona fide spiritual master is a representative of Krishna. If he bestows any blessings upon his disciple, that will make the disciple immediately advance without the disciples following the regulative principles. Or the regulative principles will be easier for one who has served the spiritual master without reservation. So we have to endeavor to make advancement in spiritual life, but simply by our endeavor we cannot become highly advanced. But we need the blessings of the advanced devotees, and ultimately then the blessing of the Supreme Lord, and then we can advance, then we can attain perfection. So the advanced devotee is absorbed in Krishna consciousness, and so he is empowered to give Krishna consciousness to others. And whatever the pure devotee wishes, so that will be attained. So if the pure devotee is seeing that the devotee, a disciple, is very sincere in his endeavor to advance, then the spiritual master is pleased, and then he will bestow his blessings. He will pray to Krishna, please, you bless this devotee. And even those who are highly advanced, so they will bless the devotee, and then automatically Krishna's blessings will be there. Cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness, external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So, two cleanliness are there, and also, so Prabhupada has explained in the previous paragraph, simplicity is someone who will be simple in consciousness, without duplicity, and here as mentioned, one has to think of Krishna always. Smartavya satatam Vishnur vismartavya no jatu chet sarva vidhi nisharyasu etayore vekinkara. Many do's and don'ts are there, rules and regulations are there, what to do and what not to do. But most important is one has to think of Krishna always. And what one should not do, that is forget him. And so that is most important, that the consciousness is pure, that one is straightforward, one is simple in his dealings, simply trying to act for the benefit of Guru Gauranga Krishna. And then naturally, so external cleanliness will be there, but practically speaking, one has to take bath in the morning, prahata snan, that is required, to take a bath in the morning and put on fresh clothes, and then engage in spiritual activities, attending the Mangalatik, and then chanting the holy names of the Lord, and then worshipping the Lord, and then hearing about the Lord. So that has to be done. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. And self-control means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. So one must have strong determination to advance. And here, so one has to accept what is favorable, anukalyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya varjanam. So what is favorable, one has to accept, what is unfavorable, one has to reject. So one has to control the mind and the senses, means one has to think of Krishna and one has to engage all the senses in Krishna seva. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. That is real renunciation. The senses are so strong that they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands, which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit, so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. It is natural that the senses will go to the sense objects, but that has to be controlled and directed towards Krishna. So the eyes, they want to see beautiful things, so one has to see Krishna in the temple. And the ears, they want to hear something nice, so that should be hearing about Krishna. The tongue wants to eat palatable foodstuffs, that is taking Krishna prasadam. And the tongue wants to always say something, that is natural also. But we should speak about Krishna, not unnecessary things, no prajalpa. Only Krishna katha should be there. The most important and uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of the tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, the tongue should always be engaged in tasting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. As far as the eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. That will control the eyes. Similarly, the ears should be engaged in hearing about Krishna, and the nose in smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This is a process of devotional service. And it is understood here that Bhagavad Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective. Unintelligent commentators on the Bhagavad Gita try to divert the mind of the readers to other subjects, but there is no other subject in Bhagavad Gita than devotional service. So many people are commenting on Bhagavad Gita, but actually only the devotees who are engaged in devotional service, who are pure devotees of the Lord, they are able to properly speak about the Bhagavad Gita. And so Bhagavad Gita, so Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and ultimately Krishna is also emphasizing on devotional service. He's explaining about jnana yoga, karma yoga, ashtanga yoga, but then ultimately he's explaining that the best form of yoga is by always thinking of him. That is the greatest yogi. And he's explaining in the 12th chapter who is dear to him. So one who is engaged in devotional service. False ego means accepting the body as oneself. When one understands that he's not this body and this spirit soul, he comes to this real ego. Real ego means I'm the servant of Krishna. And then one is engaging in devotional service. False ego is identifying with his body. I'm a man, I'm a woman. Or even with the position in this world, even as a devotee, we have to be careful and not just identifying with the position. I'm the president of the temple. And of course, sometimes we have to explain also, if one is a president, but we should, even when one is saying, one should be aware that actually I'm the servant of Krishna, but I'm in the position of president in order to serve the devotees, in order to serve my spiritual master, in order to serve the Lord. So that is a real ego. So one has, even as a devotee, one has to be conscious of that and try to be properly situated. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literatures, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am spirit. This I am, the sense of self, also exists in the liberated stage of self-realization. The sense of I am is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to this false body, it is false ego. When the sense of self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego because ego means identity. We ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body. One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age and disease. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, and the child staying in the womb of the mother, its suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful. Because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother, we do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings. They are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. These should be discussed. And as far as disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be diseased and no one wants to become old, but there's no avoiding these. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age and disease, there's no impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life. So we should understand that this material existence is not nice. There are so many difficulties there. But we have to make the best use of this bad bargain, and we have to try to become realized. And even if one is realized, then actually one will understand that there's so much suffering in this world. But the realized soul he's tolerating, and he's feeling also transcendental pleasure in the service of the Lord. And therefore he can tolerate also. As for detachment from children, wife and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection, but when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. So, the best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. So, we should not become attached to the family, to the home. At the same time, so if one is a householder, it is natural that one will have some feelings for the family, and there's nothing wrong. But one should not be overly attached to family. But one should be attached to Krishna, and then when one has a love for Krishna, then one will naturally have love for all the living beings. What to speak of the family members? But one is not overly attached to them. One is attached to Krishna. And then one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, and then a whole family is engaged in Krishna consciousness, and then everyone can be happy in Krishna consciousness. So one need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna, have some discussions on books like Bhagavad-gītā and Śrīmad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These four things will make one happy. So that is for all. The brahmachari also, they will chant the holy names, they will worship the deities, they will hear about Krishna, they will take Krishna prasadam. Householders also, all the family members, they will chant the holy names, they will worship Krishna, and they will hear about Krishna, they will take Krishna prasadam. So if these things are there, then it does not matter if one is a brahmachari or a grihasta. Then one can advance and one can be happy. And difficulties are always there, even for brahmacharis, they have difficulties. In the ashram, sometimes difficulties are there too between the devotees, but one has to tolerate and one has to try to overcome the difficulties. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these four principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. So if the family members are not favorable for Krishna consciousness, then one may be forced to give up the family situation, because the goal of life is to become Krishna conscious. And so if the family is not favorable, then they may be abandoned also. But if they are favorable, then there is no need. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members. But when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. So that refers to his cousin brothers, the Kauravas, headed by Duryodhana. They were not God conscious, and they were trying to occupy the kingdom and give the Pandavas no room. So therefore they had to fight. And that was Krishna's instruction also. And by Krishna's mercy they killed all of them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equiposed in both cases. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, just like the summer seasons are coming and going all the time, similarly the difficulties are coming and going, but one has to learn to tolerate and be situated on the transcendental plane and relish one's relationship with Krishna. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy, and when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if you are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service, ananya bhakti. No matter what, we have to be engaged in devotional service. So that is ananya bhakti, unbreakable. Not that now it is too hot, I cannot serve Krishna. Or this person is giving me so much trouble, I will not serve Krishna anymore. No. Whatever the situation is, we have to serve Krishna. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service, known as Navavida Bhakti. Chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respect, etc. as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Parasevanam, Archanam, Bandhanam, Dasyam, ātma-vinigrahaḥ. Dasyam, Sakyam, ātma-vinigrahaḥ. So in the 9th chapter in the end, Krishna is saying that Man manabhava vamad bhakto madhyadimam namaskuru. So think of me, worship me, engage in my devotional service. So in the Śrīmad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, Parikshit Maharaj is explaining about this 9th process of devotional service. We may engage in any one or all of them. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic man. That will go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, the devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function, because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. Though many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work or philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self. That is recommended here. So one has to, it is natural to research in any field, but ultimately the human form of life is meant for self-realization. And we have to search for the absolute truth. We have to search for Krishna. We have to find Krishna in our heart. We have to find ourselves. Realize that we are not different from this material, that we are different from this material world, that we are spirit soul. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the super soul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the super soul cannot be one, at least not in the bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. So the super soul is there, or the Supreme Lord is there, and we are there, and one has to engage in devotional service. Of course, Prabhupada is hinting at the Mayavadis. They say that the super soul and the soul are one, or the absolute truth and we are one. Atman, the Brahma Jyoti is there, Param Brahma, and we merge in that, but that is not the highest conception. But the real conception is that that the Supreme Lord is there, and we are individual souls, and we are meant to serve Krishna. The service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityaṁ, as it is clearly stated. So bhakti or devotional service is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Śrīmad Bhagavatam, this is explained. Vadanti tat-tattva vidas-tattvam yaj-jnanam-advyāyam. Those who actually know of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in three different phases: Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. So Brahman means the impersonal conception of the absolute truth. Paramatma means the super soul living in everyone's heart. But that is only in the material world. And Bhagavan means the Supreme Lord residing in the spiritual world. And the goal is to go to the spiritual world and engage in the transcendental loving service. Whereas in Brahman realization and in Paramatma understanding there is no seva. But the nature of the jiva is to serve. Bhagavan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the Supreme Truth, the Absolute Personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now on this staircase there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second or the third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at the lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in his spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amānitvam, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. So basically we should know we are the eternal servants of Krishna and we should engage in devotional service of the Lord, and we should try to take these points here to heart, and we should be humble without pride. One should not cause any difficulty to others. One should be tolerant, simple, and be under the guidance of the spiritual master. Cleanliness, internal and external, that is important. So if one is properly situated in this way, then one can advance nicely by the mercy of the spiritual master and Krishna and attain perfection in this very life. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. So it is clear, so we stop here and we have some prasadam also.